A young man finds himself trapped in a dull, gray routine, working every single day of his life, where one day feels exactly like the next. In some way, he thought he should feel comfortable with such stability. But the truth is he longed for something different. One night, after returning from work and switching on the TV, he is suddenly pulled into the screen itself and comes face to face with the figure on the broadcast. The man introduces himself as the one who oversees the solar system. The worker, startled, asks if that makes him some kind of alien, but the stranger explains that it's closer to a divinity while also being something like a middle manager of the universe. As they talk, the strange being begins to vent. No matter what he does with the planet called Madius, things never seem to go well. Civilizations collapse again and again, and that's why he had to intervene. Just a single drop falling on Madius can ripple outward and grow strong enough to change the entire world. And the overseer of the solar system wants this ordinary Japanese worker to be that drop. By the way, he makes it very clear. The poor man is already dead. If he refuses, his soul will simply vanish forever. But if he chooses to go to Madius, he won't be going empty-handed. The supervisor promises to send with him any gifts he desires. These gifts are what they call special abilities. To give an example, the overseer notes down an extreme magical potential in his ledger. Excited by the chance, the worker quickly makes his own requests. He asks for pleasant female companions, and the divinity assures him he'll encounter them in the new world. Beyond that, his recognition abilities will be enhanced, letting him identify materials that can be sold for money. To store them, he'll get a convenient pouch. To communicate, he'll automatically understand the local language. And on top of it all, he'll receive a variety of useful resistances. Suddenly, the man's body begins to fade away piece by piece, terrifying him. The supervisor tells him it's time to leave. Looking over the list of gifts he'd given, he realizes he may have added too much, but it's already too late. The once ordinary office worker is now sent to a fantasy world unlike anything he has ever known. When he opens his eyes for the first time in this new universe, the young man is stunned by the breathtaking scenery spread before his blue eyes. Beyond the wonder, though, comes a question. What should he do now? He decides the first step is to look for people in this strange land. After some walking, he's fortunate enough to spot a village in the distance. He doubts he'll be able to buy food without money, but then remembers he was given recognition abilities. If he can gather materials, he might be able to sell them for some cash. Eager to test it, he picks up a stick from the ground to use as a wand and shouts, "Activate recognition magic." Nothing happens, leaving him red-faced in embarrassment. Trying to figure things out, he writes the word search in the dirt. When he repeats it aloud, glowing symbols appear, pointing out materials scattered around him. That's when he realizes he must say the correct command word. Hoping to analyze things more deeply, he experiments with others like check, investigate, and scan. To his surprise, one attempt works. A virtual panel opens up, describing the detailed traits of a flower before him. Thrilled, he begins collecting items all around, yet he's disappointed that most are low-ranked. Even worse, he picks up what turns out to be a lump of dung ranked at sea level, realizing only after holding it in his hand that it was feces. Still, this strange accident teaches him something. Materials that can be traded show up with special icons, and he can track them using his recognition magic. Having collected a fair amount, he hurries toward the village, anxious to find out how much they're worth before night falls. At the village gate, he finds a guard who looks half asleep. The guard asks if he's a traveler. The young man introduces himself as Takeru, surprised by his height. The guard wonders if he might be a warrior, but Takeru explains he's only there to sell materials. The guard then introduces himself as Marlowe, a patrolman of Tormi village, and remarks that it's rare to meet someone skilled in gathering. They don't have a dedicated materials shop there, but they do have a general store. The gate opens, and Takeru enters Tormi village, drawing curious stares from the villagers along the way. Reaching the store, he asks the shopkeeper if he'd be willing to buy the dung he had found in the forest. The merchant inspects it and identifies it as hammer anteater excrement, praised for its unusual shape, strength, and color. For that material, he offers 5 silver coins. Unsure of the value, Takeru asks what a night at the inn costs. For comparison, the merchant explains it's 500 raves, with 1 silver coin worth 1,000. Doing the math, Takeru figures that if a night at the inn equals about 5,000 yen, then this lump of waste is worth 50,000 yen. He's baffled that the man wants to buy such filth at such a high price, and even more bewildered watching the merchant rub the item against his cheek like a stuffed toy. Encouraged by this, the shopkeeper eagerly asks to see what else the traveler has brought. To his astonishment, there are even rarer items inside Takeru's pouch. Curious, he asks why the young man has come all the way to such a remote place. Takeru explains that he's been traveling, collecting materials wherever he goes. In that moment, the merchant doesn't waste the opportunity and offers the outsider a job to collect mithril ore from the eastern mountain. Since Takeru shows interest and asks if there's some kind of map to help him venture into that region, the merchant first offers 360,000 raves for the materials he brought in, which, according to the boy's calculations, amounts to 3.6 million yen. An absurd sum of money, but not everything is smooth sailing in this line of work. and Takaru quickly realizes that when the shopkeeper reveals that monsters roam the eastern mountain. After this unusual encounter, the traveler finally manages to get himself a room to rest. But all he really wanted was a good bath before bed. In the middle of that, an inn worker walks into the room without waiting for permission, though she did not, carrying a basin of hot water that costs 30 raves per use, meant for customers to wash themselves. The giant scratches his head and asks if they don't have an actual bathtub around. But the girl explains that only nobles have access to something like that. Either that, or he could try to find a mage to clean him with magic though. Unfortunately, there aren't any in Tormi. Not in the mood for further chit-chat. Takaru hands over the 30 raves, along with a little tip, which makes the girl light up with happiness. Alone again, he keeps thinking about that whole idea of using magic to clean the body. So he tries to come up with a word that might work as a spell. After a brief reflection, the man shouts the word clean, and sure enough, a skill activates, scrubbing the boy's body spotless. The startled cry of surprise and delight echoes down the hallway, loud enough for the worker to hear. But Takaru doesn't care. He's so shiny and refreshed that he can't help admiring himself, though deep down, he still wishes he could have had the chance to just laze around in a bathtub. The next day, Takaru returns to the forest around Tormi, and he feels like he's finally getting the hang of this new job of collecting materials to sell. While working, he comes across a sword icon for the very first time and jumps in shock when he realizes it marks the remains of a fallen warrior. His equipment still lying there. The weapons themselves don't seem all that impressive, just ranky. Still, for peace of mind, the boy takes the time to give the deceased a proper burial, digging a grave, offering a prayer, and planting the sword into the earth as a tombstone. By late afternoon, Takaru draws a circle on the ground around himself and recites the word barrier. A magical shield activates, surrounding him before fading into invisibility. Feeling secure, the collector tosses into a boiling pot the spices he bought in the village, along with the wild vegetables gathered from the forest, and tops it off with the main ingredient, meat. Once the stew is ready, he tastes the broth and realizes this strange new life might just be the best thing that's ever happened to him. When morning comes again, Takaru sets off for the Forest of White Trees, also known as the Forest of the Ancient Dragons, the eastern mountain region where the Mithril the Merchant wanted is said to lie. Casting an orb of light to guide him through the dark woods, the boy grows frustrated. No sign of ore, no signs of life, not even monsters. The place feels dead, or maybe he just reeks so badly that even the monsters refuse to sniff him out. Whatever the case, Takaru decides to hurry out of the forest and head for the mountain. But haste makes waste. In his rush, he doesn't realize he's charging straight toward a cliff. And with rotten luck, he plummets into a gorge of terrifying depth. In desperation, he shouts the word glide, and by sheer fortune, manages to trigger a spell that slows his fall into a gentle descent. At the very least, despite the fright, the boy stumbles upon several veins of silver ore in the hidden valley. He quickly readies his pickaxe to collect the resource, but silver isn't what the merchant asked for. He wanted mithril. So, the collector uses his search magic once again, this time picking up a faint signal deeper inside the cavern. Just then, the rumbling of the earth suggests an earthquake is about to hit. With little choice, the man grabs what he can and prepares to get out fast. Mixing the spells Ignite and Eruption, the collector creates what's practically a bomb, blasting the rock where the ore's symbol appeared. The explosion opens a hole, and there it is, the mithril vein, ranked a plus. The tremors press him to leave at once, but now that he's found what he came for, Takaru can't resist going even deeper in search of a greater source. His boldness is rewarded. At the back of the cave, he discovers a spring of crystal clear water. Scanning it, Takaru realizes it's an SS rank material, his greatest find yet. Then it hits him. If this water is infused with the mana of an ancient dragon, maybe such a creature once lived here. At least, that's what he thinks until the very same dragon rises from the lake before his eyes. To the monster's surprise, the human withstands its intimidation, and even offers a humble apology for barging into its home uninvited. Since entering the workforce, this Japanese laborer had gotten used to bowing to every kind of person imaginable. But he never thought he'd one day bow before a dragon. Amused, the beast acknowledges his composure and asks who he is. The boy introduces himself, Takaru Kamishiro, just a simple human, but the dragon doesn't buy it. To him, there's no way Takaru is just a human, not when the magical power radiating from him rivals that of the ancient dragon itself. By the way, the monster reveals his name, Voldius. Unbothered by the thought of death, and even less concerned about making friends, Takaru asks if he can call the creature Vol-san. To his surprise, the request is granted. Since the ice has been broken, Voldius makes a request of his own. With the pure power of a human, perhaps the dragon might finally revive his child, whose egg has lain dormant thanks to the stagnant mana in this cavern. If Takaru agrees to help, he'll be rewarded with a good handful of mithril. When the human nods in acceptance, Voldius lifts a massive black egg from the depths of the water and explains that the boy must channel his magic into it, the same way he created the orb of light that guided him here. Wondering how to warm the egg, Takaru whispers the word heat, At once, warmth surges into the shell, but the reaction is far more disturbing than expected. It feels as though the egg is pulling his very skin inward, consuming him. As the ancient dragon's laughter echoes across the cavern, Takaru fears he's been tricked. Was his brief adventure in this new world really going to end in such a pitiful way? And just when he had started to feel so hopeful about the future, as if things weren't bad enough, his consciousness is cast into an astral sea, his body sinking in this near-death experience. Out of the void, a strange, enigmatic figure appears, scolding him for recklessly throwing himself into such dangerous situations. According to the being, any normal person would have fainted or fled for their life when facing a dragon. But Takaru behaved so differently that it feels as if he's already begun rewriting the very laws of this world. The entity admits it's been tweaking this world for hundreds of thousands of years, always with small, subtle changes. Yet Takaru Kamishiro arrived like a storm, spreading waves everywhere, an annoyance the entity can't ignore. Because of this, it decides to tone down some of the special abilities the boy had received from that kid, in other words, the overseer of the solar system. With that, Takaru awakens to the sound of a baby babbling nonsense. He finds himself in an endless void, and soon, alongside the cries of the newborn, comes the voice of Valdius, the ancient dragon. Takaru conjures another orb of light, illuminating the space to reveal the dragon's child finally hatched. As a gesture of thanks, Valdius allows him to name the hatchling. After a moment's thought, Takaru decides on B, short for black, since the little creature's scales are jet black. Ironically, Valdius mishears it as B de Black, all strung together, and the name sticks that way. What's more, Valdius declares that his child must explore the vast world at Takaru's side, a responsibility the boy finds far too heavy, not to mention sudden. Still, as Valdius had said earlier, Takaru is even stronger than he is. The ancient dragon can rest easy knowing his son is in capable hands. Before disappearing back into the depths, the monster casts a mysterious spell toward Takaru's bag, then plunges once more into the vast lake, now entrusted with the newborn. Takaru invites B to join him on a journey to gather materials, but before they set off, he notices the hatchling reeks unbearably. With a grimace, he uses the skill Clean on the little one better to save his nose from what would otherwise be a very unpleasant trip. Finally, the two of them leave the cave, and Takaru can see the joy in B's eyes as he looks at the outside world for the very first time in his life. However, not everything is happiness, because besides being too late to walk through the forest, the boy is also starving. So, he decides to camp right there so they can rest before continuing their journey. Before organizing everything, Takaru opens his bag and takes out a cup of elemental water. Since Valdius had connected his backpack to the underground lake, now the human has an infinite source of that water, which is necessary for B's growth, and Takaru himself can drink it too. At night, he places his magic stones on the ground to activate the shield that will protect them until morning. According to the encyclopedia he bought at Jerome's shop, those stones are considered precious. Using a heating effect, to his surprise, Takaru finds out he's able to make that kind of item easily. So he uses one of his creations to light a campfire. With the fire burning, the collector roasts some meat and makes a stew for himself. But B keeps staring at the food, even though he's afraid the little one might get a stomachache. Takaru lets him eat a bit as long as he waits for it to cool down. However, B's greed makes him ignore the warning. He flips the bowl of stew and gulps it all at once, feeling the burning heat invade his throat. So, Takaru blows on another bowl of stew until it cools, and then gives it to his partner, who downs it again without wasting a second. After eating so much, the dragon looks completely out of it. His belly is round as a pregnant dog's. Takaru jokes that it would be boring if only he could eat such things, and at least now B can share his meals. Putting that aside, he asks if the little dragon feels lonely being away from his parents, but B hugs the human, making it clear that as long as they're together, everything will be fine. Feeling happy, Takaru checks the little monster's skills and sees that he's a B rank with incredible talent. Still, he's just a child, so even though B is strong, his friend advises him not to do anything reckless otherwise. It's Takaru who gets scolded by Valdius. That said, the little B was already sleeping deeply and didn't hear a single word of what the guy said. Thinking to himself, Takaru remembers that before entering this world, he had asked for an adorable companion. He isn't really sure if this reptile is what he meant, but somehow, he feels that Weird Manager did it on purpose. Be that as it may, the boy continues his journey alongside the winged monster, who watches as the human climbs a cliff while he enjoys the privilege of flying. To his surprise, when Takaru reaches the top, he realizes he's back in the same forest as yesterday. And as if by chance, it no longer feels scary. Takaru figures it must be one of those mysterious forests, since he's obviously not in a normal world. Once inside, he focuses on finding C-rank resources and activates his search ability, getting excited when he discovers several different herbs. However, the gathering is interrupted when B suddenly appears in panic, terrified by something. Takaru expands the range of his search ability and detects several aggressive monsters approaching their location. Before entering the cave yesterday, he thought his scent kept the monsters away, but whether that's true or not, it seems the smell has faded, and now he's exposed. Still, the collector knows he's not an easy opponent to face, so he gets ready for a possible battle, confident in his powers. And sure enough, a rock hawk appears, a gigantic C-rank creature. Truth be told, after meeting Voldius, the ancient dragon, this steroid-filled hawk looks more like a chicken. And let's just say, fried chicken for lunch wouldn't be a bad idea. Speaking of which, Takeru analyzes that the bird's meat is rich, sweet, and fatty, so he doesn't waste the chance and begins his attack. First, he raises a magic shield, then creates ice needles that pierce the creature's skin and finish it off instantly. As expected, that enemy wasn't the only one around the human and his dragon. Without delay, 6 C-rank serpent wolves appear and surround their prey. Takeru boosts his speed with the quickness skill and uses reduction to make his body lighter. After dodging one of the wolves' lunges with a massive jump, the boy activates hardening on his arms and legs, then lands with a powerful kick to one wolf's neck. Next, he punches another right on the snout, sending it flying into a third one. The fourth wolf takes a kick to the jaw, if wolves even have jaws. The last two get hard slaps right across their faces, ending the fight. With that done, the collector does what he does best: collect. After taking the animal's meat, he notices there are still several monsters roaming the area, and maybe he'll never make it out of this damn forest, at least not alive. Afraid his partner might kick the bucket, B starts pulling him upward with all his strength. With the beating of his wings, he manages to lift the human's body. But he's too heavy, so Takeru gives him a hand by reducing his weight again. Now, the funny part is that the force the dragon was using suddenly sends them shooting upward, and B completely loses control of the flight. He ends up dropping his friend from a great height, and Takeru crashes to the ground after having his fall softened, luckily, by the trees. It was a real miracle that Kamishiro Takeru survived that, and B acknowledges it by licking the guy's face with his stinky tongue. Takeru complains about the smell of manure, but the trauma leaves him unable to move or even make a disgusted face. To make things worse, B did manage to take them out of the white tree forest, but brought them right back to the exact same place where they camped yesterday. Because of that, the boy almost starts to complain, but since the dragon only did it with the intention of saving him, he lets it go. He just reminds the flying lizard to remember that he's a human, not a doll. B doesn't understand a thing the guy said, so he gives up on passing the message and simply holds on to the certainty that his friend will always be there for him. That, B heard, and filled with pure joy, he hugs the poor boy with incredible strength. Anyway, the two continue their journey toward Tormi village, which is a day's walk from where they are. B seems intrigued by the stick his partner is carrying, so Takeru explains that it's a dormant branch of Yggdrasil that he had kept in his bag. Hearing that, without asking for permission, B blows mana into the stick and awakens it, turning it into a staff. Honestly, Takeru didn't seem too happy with that transformation, since he would hate to be mistaken for a mage, but since there's nothing he can do, so be it. Suddenly, the two hear a brutal roar coming from deep within the forest. B immediately grabs onto Takeru, while the human shows concern for the terror that sound carried. After a sudden burst of courage, B flies toward the noise, forcing his companion to run after him. On the way, the dragon finds an injured elf leaning against a tree, so Takeru approaches and asks if she was attacked by the terrifying monster of the forest. However, the elf was the terrifying monster, or rather, that grotesque roar was nothing more than her stomach growling after 3 days without eating. Almost at her limit, the elf asks for a sip of water, and Takeru quenches her thirst, but not her hunger, so the growling continues. Remembering that the innkeeper had given him a special lunch, the boy shows his kindness by handing the lunchbox to the starving woman, who devours the meal without a hint of restraint. Maybe it was hunger, but upon tasting that food, the woman felt as if she were ascending to heaven. Changing the subject, Takeru had to ask her something. Sure, it's understandable that she's far from the village, but not that far to go without food. Embarrassed, she answers that she was in a hurry, so Takeru replies that even people in a hurry usually take food with them. Filled with anger, and without an answer, being cornered like that, the elf releases a terrible smell, forcing the poor human to cover his nose. He swore elves smelled like a spring breeze with a touch of peppermint, but this one smelled like fertilizer. Smelling her clothes to check how bad it is, the woman argues that it's not her fault, she's been camping for 3 days. After all, either way, embarrassed, she thanks him for saving her but decides to leave, claiming she's in a hurry, but not before mumbling that it's not polite to say people smell like fertilizer. After parting ways with the elf, Takeru collects a few more materials along the path as he leaves the forest. Luckily for him, as soon as he steps out of the woods, he comes across a carriage driven by a friendly man, whose vehicle is pulled by a strong unicorn breed rank E usually used to pull chariots and similar things. When asked, Takeru says he's heading to Tormi village. Concerned about the young man walking such a long distance, the coachman asks if Takeru is a mage, and he explains that he's just a collector. The coachman is impressed to meet a specialist collector, since it's rare to find one. Takeru, however, never said he was an expert in the first place, but decides to stay quiet. Finally, the friendly driver offers the traveler a ride, so Takeru joins the man's lovely family to continue his journey. Along the way, the children start to really like Takeru, which for him is a good thing, since that way their parents could trust him more easily. He apologizes for taking up space in the wagon, but the family reminds him that Tormi's motto is always to help others. Grateful, Takeru reflects that these little kids must be very brave to travel together, since the road is always dangerous. Speaking of that, he asks what they would do if he turned out to be a bandit. The little boy replies that they would know, because the magic item would ring a bell if someone dangerous got close. Thinking he could make something like that, Takeru finally introduces himself to his new friends. Then Eliza, the mother, introduces Poran and their children, Kain and Yunin. Lastly, there's someone Takeru had been trying to hide until now. But since the little creature was wriggling inside his clothes, the boy decides to show B, though he hides the fact that the little lizard is the child of an ancient dragon. Poran asks if he's some kind of dragon knight, so Takeru fumbles a bit while explaining that he just found an egg, but the family doesn't seem worried about it. Even so, Eliza knows that those creatures and dragon knights too are extremely rare, which leaves her at least suspicious. Speaking of that, Takeru also feels curious about that dragon knight talk. Hours later, when night falls, the collector sets out his magic stones that alert them if any monsters approach, and on top of that, B would warn them if anything dangerous got near. The family shows complete trust in the dragon, and Takeru finds it curious that these people don't even slightly doubt such a powerful creature. Eliza offers to cook dinner, but as a thank you, Takeru takes the responsibility himself. Impressing everyone, he pulls ingredients from his bag and quickly prepares a special meat salad. Eliza and the children immediately show how much they love the meal, though Poran doesn't seem very enthusiastic. Concerned, Takeru asks if he went overboard with the seasoning, but the truth is, Poran liked it so much he couldn't hold back his tears. After all, he and his family had been eating only dried meat every day, and there's no greater joy for him than seeing his children so happy with such a meal. According to the man, Takeru is a mage of cooking. After dinner, everyone joined together to sing songs, and that unique moment of unity and joy made Takeru reflect deeply on his life. While he was on Earth, living his ordinary life as a regular worker, he had never noticed that, compared to eating alone in silence, nights like this weren't bad at all. For the first time since he arrived in this new world, he feels that he was truly able to laugh with deep sincerity. When he finally lies down to sleep, Takeru gently pats B's head, who by then is already fast asleep. Feeling fulfilled, the young man looks up at the starry sky and smiles. Early in the morning, while Poran was brushing the horse, Takeru was polishing his shears to keep them in good condition. Also awake, Eliza came closer and commented that those who take care of their tools are always good workers. Hearing that, the boy reflected that he had just gone with the flow, but it really seemed like being a collector suited him. Poran then said they would continue their journey after breakfast. Curiously, Takeru suddenly felt like driving the carriage, so he took the reins of the unicorn. Building a bond with the animal, the boy even asked it to speed up a little, and it obeyed. Poran remarked that the creature seemed to like him, and Takeru replied that they were very intelligent beings. Speaking of which, B woke up and sat on Takeru's lap, while the children repeated the name of Tormi village as they saw it drawing closer. As soon as they reached the entrance of the village, Takeru got down from the wagon, and after being praised for everything he had done for the family, he thanked them himself for sparing him the effort of walking all that distance. When the carriage left, Marlowe mentioned that if Poran was back, it meant spring was near. Takeru asked what the man did for a living, and the guard explained that in winter he sold knit materials in some warmer regions, so when Poran appeared, it meant the season was changing. By the way, according to Marlowe, Poran had said how hard his work had been since he couldn't hunt and had managed to get little food or goods in general. That made Takeru understand why Poran had cried when eating something different yesterday, and he reflected on how blessed he was to have a special ability for collectors. Changing the subject, the guard asked if his friend shouldn't report the mission that Jerome had given him. Remembering that, Takeru went to the man's shop, where he analyzed the mithril that the collector had brought. The boy had brought what the merchant wanted, but had mixed in a piece of magical mithril ore just to see what the man would say. Quickly, the merchant noticed it and asked where the collector had gotten that ore, since it was the stuff of legends extremely valuable, like a mass of condensed mana, and that just a few of them could replace the magic stones used throughout the kingdom. Faced with the boy's shocked reaction, the merchant commented that it took great talent to find such a rare item, and therefore he thought Takeru should go to Belkame, a city much larger than that village, with its own adventurers guild where Takeru could truly learn how the world worked. Excited by the advice, the boy wanted to know what an adventurer's guild was. After finding the definition in a book, he read that it was an association of adventurers who offered their services across the country. divided into groups that organized themselves into combat and support units. Thinking about that, since he had been dropped into this world out of nowhere, Kamishiro Takeru wanted to take the opportunity to travel and see new places and things, and he could even make some money if he worked as an adventurer. With that in mind, the young collector decided to go to Belkame, but not before settling a few things in Tormi. So, as evening fell over the village, a great feast with a banquet began, and Takeru joined the celebration alongside B, who charmed everyone, especially the children, with her cuteness and sweetness. Takeru, in turn, was also loved and respected by the locals, for whom he felt great admiration as well. The next day, the collector went into the forest to get some interesting materials from the area. Later, he returned to Tormi and picked up from a merchant the powdered broth made from rock falcon bones that he had ordered. Knowing that the young man was leaving for the big city, the woman admitted that everyone would miss him starting tomorrow. She even said the villagers had been asking him to stay a little longer, but although he loved that place, the collector wanted to see the world outside and didn't want to lose a few more days. So the woman gave up on trying to keep him and respected his decision, giving him a travel lunch, since it would take about a month to reach Belkame. Even so, not satisfied, the lady stuffed the boy with gifts as if she were his grandmother. And with each new bag he received, Takeru thanked the heavens for having an item box to store all that stuff. When he returned to his room, Takeru found it curious that Jerome hadn't wanted to buy the ore he had praised so much. Maybe the boy could come up with something to use it for. After thinking a bit, and remembering how well everyone had treated him upon his return, the young man thought he should do something nice for the people of Tormi. Then, after some thought, he put together the piece of mithril and a lantern, and began a fusion process, imagining the final result in his mind. Soon, after a few seconds of a magical reaction between the two items, they merged and formed the object the boy had envisioned. The next morning, the people of Tormi gathered to say goodbye to their dear friend. Grateful for all the affection he had received, the young man took from his backpack the magical tool he had crafted and handed it to Marlowe, explaining that it projected a barrier around the village, preventing any danger from entering the protected area. Seeing how powerful the item was, the man asked if he could really accept something like that, and Takeru replied that not only was he repaying everything the villagers had done for him, but he also wanted to keep everyone safe until he returned after all. He now considered Tormi village his home. Moved, Jerome took the lantern from Marlowe's hand and asked whether, by any chance, Takeru had used that item from yesterday to make it. Then he opened it himself and realized he had, but knowing he'd be scolded. Takeru ran off from the village, eager to reach the big city as soon as possible. However, there was still a long road ahead, so the boy began his journey through the fresh and peaceful fields around Tormi. Ironically, speaking of peace, the collector ran into a Mont Blanc crab, a giant sea-rank creature that, besides being edible, had a shell that could be used to make armor. Focusing on the edible part, Takeru got excited to face the monster, then activated his reduction and hardening skills. B, on the other hand, acted first and let out a roar that immediately knocked the crab down. However, two more appeared right after. Takeru prepared a strategy based on the fact that this kind of animal only runs sideways, but for some reason, these creatures could also move forward. While the boy was lost in thought, the animals attacked at the same time. So B grabbed the human's clothes and pulled him upward to avoid the impact. The crabs hit each other head-on and fell stiff to the ground. However, when Takeru was placed back on the surface, the first crab got up again and charged at the human. Faced with a situation, using his amazing finishing move, Takeru played baseball with the creature, striking it hard as if he were holding a bat. At night, when Takeru and B found a place to spend the night, the boy used hardening on his hand to cut one of the crabs. Taking out a giant pot, he placed the pieces of the animal inside, added plenty of salt, and let it boil. After some time cooking, the crab meat was ready to eat. Feeling the wonderful flavor of it, Takeru became even more excited to continue exploring the world and discovering even more amazing foods. A month later, the countryside boy arrived at the gates of Belkame and was impressed by the size of the wall and its unique architecture. Either way, before entering, it seemed he had to go through an inspection. So he joined the line and waited for his turn, but before anything else, he used magic to disguise his item bag and make it look normal. When it was his turn to be inspected, after analyzing the traveler's belongings, one of the guards commented that it was rare to find a material collector around there. Then asked if the young man had come to sell materials. Takeru said he was more interested in the Adventurers Guild, which the guard understood, since Belkame was known as the city of trade and adventure. However, to allow Takeru to enter, he needed to use the Avaris on him, a magical device that identifies whether newcomers are suspicious. When the verification was done, nothing suspicious was found about the boy, and the female guard confirmed that his belongings also had nothing unusual. Wanting to know how his status appeared to others, Takeru thought of using Scan to take a look at what the guard was seeing. Doing that, he checked the file of Radon and Ahasis. Looking deeper, he found what people saw about him. Takeru, 19 years old, undefined rank, a collector who, even without certification, possesses specialized level abilities, and bears the dragon's blessing. Takaru found it funny how simple his profile looked, especially because that man from the other world had given him many blessings, yet none of them were visible. Finally, Radon confirmed that everything was fine with the traveler, but said he'd love to know what that dragon's blessing was. Takaru showed B and answered that it was probably because of this little guy. Seeing the dragon, the guard asked the traveler to put something on him to prove he was indeed his companion. So, Takaru searched through his things and found a gift he had received from the children in Tormi, a bracelet that fit perfectly around B's tail. With that, Radon said he would register a report with the mayor, informing that a dragon had entered the city, which shouldn't cause any problems. The female guard beside him mentioned that the local guild was located on the city's main road. And then the gate was opened so that Takaru and B could finally enter Belkim. Crossing the tunnel and reaching a marketplace, the two saw how many different kinds of people were walking back and forth, which made the boy think he had arrived in another world until he remembered that, in fact, he had. Without delay, B pointed out the guild to his partner, and Takaru wasted no time heading there to explore. Being a good country boy, he opened the door very slowly, as if entering a stranger's house, until he was greeted by a receptionist named Ariana, who introduced the place as the Europa Adventurers Guild. The receptionist handed the boy a form to fill out, and since he didn't know how to write in the local language, he was surprised by a skill that, for some reason, made him know exactly which words to put on the paper. After receiving the form, Ariana asked if the man had any combat experience. He said yes and mentioned the monsters he had defeated so far. When the employee asked for proof, the guy pulled a giant crab out of his bag and dropped it on the counter, which, of course, broke it completely. Ariana ran away in fear after the man's reckless action, while all the adventurers turned to look directly at the boy and his dead Mont Blanc crab. Even terrified, Ariana recognized the creature's corpse as proof that Takaru had defeated it. One of the adventurers asked if the boy had pulled the carcass out of an item box, and Takaru confirmed that he had received one as a gift, using an ability. The beast man evaluated Takaru and said he was telling the truth, then told Ariana that this human had been classified as blue. Takaru asked what that meant, so the adventurer regretted having used the avarice on him without permission. According to him, his version of the technique reads a person's nature, and the blue aura surrounding the human meant that he wasn't involved in any trouble. Leaving that aside, the beast man announced it was time to move on to the assessment and payment. But Ariana explained that the client was still in the middle of registration. Confused, the beast man thought the human had come to sell the crab, until Takaru said that the animal was actually for eating. Shocked by that information, everyone changed the subject and asked if there was another member in the boys group. Takaru points at B, and then everyone turns their eyes back to the boy with a look of astonishment. Yet intrigued by everything he has shown just on this first visit to the guild, many become interested in inviting such a skilled collector to their groups. Faced with all the attention the traveler is getting, Ariana pulls him into a room to finish the registration. After stamping a document and completing the process, she places a bracelet on the table and explains that all newly registered adventurers start at rank F, the lowest one. When Takaru puts on the bracelet, B wags her tail to say that the two of them are matching now. Days later, upon returning to the city, Takaru handed over to the parents the belongings he had found from the adventurer who went missing in the forest near Tormi village. Takaru tried to comfort the family, saying that the boy didn't seem to have suffered much. But of course, despair took over everyone, as they thanked him for coming all that way just to tell them about their son's whereabouts. Takaru noticed the man start coughing. That made him remember what Radon, the gate inspector of Belkim, had said that a man named Belria Fend had accepted a quest in order to buy medicine for his father. At first, all Takaru planned to do was return the boy's belongings to the family. But given the circumstances, he asked for permission to do something more. Then, the collector went to the guild and, to finish his mission, delivered 8 Aprara leaves, 6 Polyvent roots, 20 Ruri mushrooms, and 20 Akane mushrooms, which earned him great praise from the client and the certainty that he would be requested again in the future. Speaking of which, Ariana appeared with a pile of paperwork to prove that several people were proposing jobs specifically for Takaru. Since he couldn't take them all, Takaru promised to at least take a look at part of the paperwork. Later, he relaxed at a bathhouse with B. It had been 15 days since he arrived in Belkim, and he remembered when he first found the awful water of that public bathhouse. Back then, he had used a cleaning skill to fix the problem, making the baths far more pleasant for him after each day of adventure. Suddenly, a humanoid creature approached, looking for Takaru. The human recognized Clay and commented that it was rare to see him there at that hour. Clay said his old wound was hurting again and that it would probably rain soon. Speaking of which, he asked if the boy was able to use healing magic, since he had heard rumors that Takaru had healed a sick person in the slums. Assuming Clay was talking about the father of Belria, the missing adventurer, Takaru explained that he had only imitated what he had seen once before. Clay asked if the boy really didn't charge money for that, and after hearing yes, the lizardman found it impressive how humble he was, saying he could make good money with that. Speaking of that, Takaru imagined that the doctors who made a living from healing would probably be furious with him. So Clay burst out laughing and pointed out that now the human could rank up. But since Takaru made it clear he was satisfied with his current rank, the humanoid commented on how the boy really had no greed at all. Takaru disagreed, saying that he actually coveted a very sharp pair of scissors for collecting materials. As he left the bath, his friend said that wasn't what he meant and that the boy should learn more about common sense. Later, upon receiving payment for a completed job, Takaru once again heard from a guild representative that he should rank up, and that it was very likely the collector would reach high levels in the future. Once again, the boy refused, because he knew he would only have to deal with bigger problems if he climbed the guild ranks, when all he wanted was to live peacefully. Despite the collector's wishes, reality struck when an adventurer ran into the guild shouting about a goblin attack. Quickly, all adventurers ranked D and above were summoned to gather immediately at the North Station. Along with all available healers and doctors, the leader of the adventurers asked Muesli if there was any ranked adventurer in the city, and she replied that Clayston, the Dragon King of Honor, was there, then ran off to call him. As for Takaru, being rank F, he simply walked past after all. This wasn't his problem. However, the leader called the boy out against his will. Then, he explained to the fighters that the front line was southwest of the Stavlov Plains, from where the goblins would likely head straight to Belkame. The adventurers' mission was to make sure the enemies didn't cross the Zalwys River Bridge. When the warriors raised their fists and shouted to lift their spirits, Takaru felt a little embarrassed, and also out of place among the others. In fact, two beastmen told the rank F boy not to get too excited and stay out of their way, assuming he would probably chicken out in fear anyway. Then, the leader approached Takaru and said that Grit had been praising a certain material collector a lot, since Grit was a very competent evaluator and held Takaru in such high regard. The leader thought the boy must really be special, especially because he didn't seem intimidated by his threatening tone. The beastman questioned if Rotor was being serious after all. He was just a skinny kid, while Takaru himself thought it wasn't a good idea for the man to speak so highly of him, since he didn't want that kind of pressure. In any case, thinking that the collector could take care of himself, Rotor just asked the boy to also protect those he cared about in battle, then called Diego and Orold before leaving. Left alone with Takaru, Muesli apologized for the guild master's selfishness, saying she had never seen him summon a rank F before, but since the collector was now part of the resistance force, she told him to give his best, just as she would do as a healer, or rather she was able to heal, at least a little, maybe enough not to disappoint the guild master. Later, the adventurers headed toward the battlefield and camped at the top of a mountain, where Muesli, terrified of birds, clung to Takaru the whole time. Realizing that the girl would cause trouble if he didn't do something, the human gave the rat woman a shake, telling her she was trembling with fear even before facing the real enemies, and since she could heal, she should focus on that instead. After all, no one said she had to fight. Besides, it's okay to be afraid. After all, in a war, people hurt others and get hurt themselves, and fear is necessary to keep us standing and fighting, because it's the feeling that tells us we must do everything we can to survive, and Muesli also has the power to do that. Hearing those words, the girl swallows her tears and her eyes shine again, as she promises to give her best. When she leaves, Clay arrives, laughing at what the boy said about it being normal to feel fear on the battlefield. About that, Takaru lets the guy laugh if he wants to, since those words really don't even sound like something he would say, but Clay apologizes and explains that he was just surprised by how passionately the collector is dealing with all this. Takaru explains that he just doesn't want things to go wrong later, then asks if the lizard shouldn't be on the front line. Clay replies that the wound on his back keeps him from moving as freely as before. To be honest, the great warrior feels ashamed of it, because he really isn't the same anymore. About that, Takaru argues that the lizard got those wounds while helping people, and since he's still alive, he'll be able to help even more, even if not completely convinced. Clay recognizes that it's a point of view worth considering. In the middle of that, the adventurers hear the sound of a trumpet, and the lizard imagines that something has broken through the guild master's formation, and that soon the enemy army will be there. So the experienced warrior grabs his spear and announces that he will go to the front line even with his serious back wound, with the conviction that it's worth sacrificing his own life to protect his allies. When Clayston leaves, Takaru notices that Muesli, who had been terrified before, is now calming her fellow healers and leading them, saying they're capable of doing their job before the enemies arrive. That behavior makes Takaru remember when Rotor said he should protect those he wants to on the battlefield, and that makes the boy realize it's not the time to run from that responsibility. So he picks up his staff and forms a protective barrier around the camp, reassures the healers, and says he's going after Clay. Sometime later, at the Zalwys River Bridge, Diego and Orold struggle to stop the goblins from breaking through the defense line, which would certainly allow the enemies to reach Belkame. In the middle of that, Takaru arrives running and strengthens his arms and legs with support magic, then joins the fight, knocking down the first goblin with a punch. Deep down, even though they're monsters, he feels it strange to kill humanoid creatures like that. But surely now isn't the time to question it. Then he asks B to lend a hand, and the baby dragon releases an electric current that defeats the opponents. After that, Takeru asks how the enemies managed to push the adventurers back, and they explain that a kind of high-ranking creature appeared in the battle, a goblin sergeant who messed up the front line. Thanks to Clay, they managed to retreat that far, but unfortunately, they got separated from the Dragon King of Honor along the way, and it's very likely that he's facing the goblins at the heart of the battle without the help he needs. Indeed, farther ahead from the bridge where the adventurers are, the lizardman faces an endless number of enemies. Even though his strength is tremendous, the huge wound on his back is enough to limit his movements and cause such pain that, at times, the warrior has to kneel just to endure the suffering. In one of those moments of weakness, when the goblins are about to attack him from behind, Takeru appears beside B, who releases lightning that defeats the monsters and saves the comrade. Even though he was saved, Clay shouts that this isn't a proper place for a collector. Then the human gives him a slap on the back to remind him that he's in no condition to be alone there, so the best thing to do is to retreat and regroup. After recovering from the pain of the slap, the lizard hears the roar of the goblin sergeant and says it's impossible to run away. Without delay, the higher-ranked monster appears and attacks quickly, forcing the adventurers to dodge at the last second. Besides being strong and fast, the sergeant summons forces to fight by his side. While the adventurers struggle to survive, Takeru asks if Clay's wound carries deep memories, or if it reminds him of someone important, something that shouldn't be erased. Even without understanding what the human means, the lizard replies that the scar is only a mark of his foolishness, nothing more. Thinking his companion wouldn't mind if he removed the mark, Takeru asks B to take down the goblins around them with his electricity. After that, he takes some water from the ancient dragon and pours it on Clayston. Then, thinking of a word that could trigger a spell strong enough to regenerate such a deep scar, the collector shouts, "Read a Fury." Soon, a green aura covers the lizardman's body and slowly closes his wound. Along with that, Clay regains a more animalistic and more aggressive form. Feeling at the peak of his physical form again, the lizard jumps toward the enemies and causes instant chaos, not taking long before he massacres all the goblins who stood against him. After that victory, Rotor approaches Takeru to ask if it was him who released Clayston's power. The boy says he only cast a healing spell on him, but the guild master has already heard about the collector who's been casting a series of powerful and mysterious spells, so he asks once and for all who the hell this boy is. He answers that he's just an F-rank collector, and Rotor doesn't insist on a more detailed explanation. On the contrary, he says the young man will be rewarded for his help, and that he'll be summoned again in the future. However, Takeru doesn't escape from another person demanding answers this time, Clayston himself, because even though he's returned to his blue form, he can still feel something fierce and burning inside him. Thrown against the wall, the human says that he only poured some magic water on his partner and said the word, "Read a Fury." In fact, it's a water with an absurdly concentrated density of mana, which lies in the depths of a cave belonging to an ancient dragon called Vol something, who is B's father. This water is connected to the boy's pouch and would certainly be useful to heal his companion's wounds. But Takeru never imagined that such a transformation would happen. Clay asks if the young man is really capable of casting advanced healing spells, and he explains that he only knows how to imitate what others do. For example, when using healing magic, if you imagine how the patient's body was made, it seems to increase the level of effectiveness. Takeru knew that the back contains very important nerves, which really helped. Faced with this explanation, with a very serious expression, Clay asks who Takeru really is. Frightened by the seriousness of those words, the human tries to recall whether that strange guy had forbidden him from saying anything about his origin. But surely revealing the truth would cause an uproar he doesn't want for himself, and his idea of having a peaceful life would go straight down the drain. At the same time, the boy feels responsible for causing Clay's transformation. Seeing that the kid is struggling to come up with an answer, his companion doesn't insist, then heads toward the door, but Takeru stops him to tell the truth. It turns out that he came from a different world after being resurrected in this body, and even though Clay was obviously shocked by that conversation, Takeru went on and said everything he knew about himself, even if he didn't know it all. About that, Clay admits he doesn't fully believe everything that was said. But since the human was able to transform him into a dragonel, he ends up giving in. Takeru asks what's that about dragonel, and Clay explains that it's an ancient race that was the origin of lizardmen like him, and he feels proud to have regained such a noble lineage, even though it scares him since he feels that he could destroy everything around him in the blink of an eye. Then, Takeru goes to the display window of a weapon shop, because he really wanted to buy something from there. Before he could enter, a beastwoman approaches him and asks if he's interested in something. Takeru asks if her shop sells harvest scissors. The girl, after saying no, asks if the boy is that famous collector everyone's talking about. Even without really knowing if he is, the boy confirms. Then the Catwoman introduces herself as Ribble. According to her, her boss Graufas is a great blacksmith and can help with the scissor issue. although the human will probably have to do something for him in return. Then, Ribble takes Takeru to her boss, and on the way, the boy comes across some dwarves working together to manufacture equipment, and the process enchants him. Equally impressed, Ribble comments that she loves this profession so much that she has always dreamed of forging a sword that will one day be used by a hero. When the duo arrives in the boss's room and the human is introduced as the collector everyone's talking about in town, the boss Grauthas acknowledges that, apparently, this boy has been achieving many things. Ribble says that this collector could even get the Ildra ore they need to make the sword for the competition. But the dwarf thinks it's very unlikely that a mere collector would accept going to a place as dangerous as the Ruhai mine. To Takeru's surprise, the employee starts arguing with the boss, replying that they'll only know if they ask. And the dwarf's lack of authority makes the human wonder if this guy is really the great blacksmith that girl talked about. Finally, after getting tired of the argument, Grauthas raises his voice and makes it clear that it's always Ribble who comes up with these crazy ideas, completely forgetting that nowadays there are much more things than just monsters in Ruhai like demons. Ribble replies that she's heard about that, and that's probably why fewer and fewer people dare to extract the Ildra ore. Calling the employee Rib, the boss says that she's not fit to be a blacksmith if she doesn't take other people's lives seriously. Of course, he's grateful that she brought this collector thinking about the forge's future. But he can't allow an innocent man to die because of selfish wishes. Ribble feels the impact of the message and apologizes to Takeru. But to both their surprise, Takeru accepts the challenge and promises to bring back this ore from the Ruhai mine. As long as, if he succeeds, the blacksmiths will build him a perfect pair of scissors for collecting materials. Grauthas asks if the boy heard anything they said, and to prove that he has already defeated powerful creatures before, Takeru throws the giant crab's pincer onto the table. Right away, Grauthas recognizes that it's the monster that even B-rank adventurers had trouble dealing with, which gives him credibility. After receiving permission to begin this mission, the collector leaves by carriage for the Ruhai mine, which is located around Evoila village and is a mine under the control of Vazrau Rock. B asks for a bit of crab meat, but unfortunately, it's all gone, which the human also deeply regrets. A female passenger on the carriage comments that she's heard about very strange things happening in this area, since it seems all the poisonous plants from the Robles Mountains have simply dried up out of nowhere. The man sitting beside her adds that he's also heard about problems in the forest of white trees, and Takeru thinks he might even be the one responsible for that mess. Finally, the collector is dropped off in the region he wanted, in front of a horse seller, which makes him imagine how great it would be to travel with a good mount. On the other hand, one particular customer didn't seem very happy with the service she was getting. Or rather, the elf was completely furious because she had asked for a purebred white horse capable of flying high in the sky. But instead, the seller ordered her an overweight albino raven. The dwarf explains that, in this business, when someone says, "I want a horse," it's the same as saying, "I want a mount." After all, every animal is a horse to them. Incredibly, the elf apologizes for not having understood correctly, and the dwarf apologizes back, recognizing that it was a lack of communication between both sides. Now, since the customer is looking for a white stallion, maybe she can find one in Vazrau Rock, in the country of the dwarves. Hearing that, even starving, the elf sets off on her adventure. Takeru notices that she's going to the same place as them, but doesn't approach her to talk about it. On the contrary, the human and his baby dragon continue their journey alone, and are impressed by the number of different materials they find in the nearby forest, especially the moon night grass, a nectar loved by spirits that helps to cure fatigue and can be used as an ointment. However, once again, just like in his previous expedition to a forest, the collector hears a huge roar echoing through the woods, but when he gets closer to the deafening sound, he realizes it's just that same elf from last time, now starving like 1,000 bricklayers. Feeling like he's seen this scene before, Takeru feeds and gives water to the poor girl again. This time, however, he wouldn't forgive that terrible smell of hers, so he decides to use his clean skill to tidy up the lady. After all, he doesn't want to ruin the image of elves he has in his head. Even more grateful, the elf introduces herself as Velverita Brolite, and since the human certainly won't remember that, she asks to be called Brolite, which is how her older brother calls her. Changing the subject, Brolite points out that she owes the boy a great debt, since he saved her twice, so she offers to help with whatever's needed. Takeru doesn't show much interest in receiving help, but Brolite insists that an elf never fails to repay a debt. Therefore, since there's no way to refuse, the boy accepts a helping hand until they reach the next town. Thus, the elf helps in collecting materials, but let's just say she's not very talented at it. First of all, she brings the boy something she thought was hammer anteater dung, when in fact it was just an ordinary rock. Then, she brings a handful of poop thinking it was from the anteater, but it was just a random pile of poop. Later on, trying to show she could be useful, she brought a mushroom to the collector, but it turned out to be just a poisonous one, and nothing else. Seeing that, Takeru started to think this girl might have the same mental age as B, and honestly, it was no wonder those two were getting along so well. That night, as they prepared to camp, Brolite asked if they should gather some firewood. Takaru explained that he had magic stones, so there was no need to collect any, but the elf said it was important to leave traces of campfires around the forest to let other travelers know the area was safe to camp in. Believing in that, she went off into the woods and came back dragging an entire log. Takaru was about to ask if she really knew what she was doing, but before he could say a word, she tossed the log high into the air and sliced it into countless pieces with a pair of daggers. Her movements precise and dazzling. Dumbfounded, Takaru checked the status of her equipment and, for the first time, saw 2 rank weapons, the Sylph Jambiya, treasures of the high elves that carried the power of wind and could only be wielded by elves of rare bloodlines. When night fell, Brolite could hardly believe she'd get to eat alongside her new companions again. During dinner, they talked about why each of them was heading to Vosrau. Takaru said he was on a mission to collect Ildra ore from the Ruhai mine, while Brolite explained she was after a divine steed her sister, Ludicara, desired. After tasting the wonderful mix of dango and vegetables, the elf realized she still owed this man quite a lot. Because of that, she offered to help him even more if he ever needed it. Remembering how easily she'd handled that log, Takaru asked if she'd like to be his bodyguard for a while. Brolite wondered if she'd have to act like those royal knights who sacrifice their lives to protect their masters from lurking dangers. But in truth, the collector had something far less dramatic in mind, like learning how to chop firewood the way she did. The elf wasn't sure, but she felt meeting this human again might be some kind of divine sign. Grateful to her goddess rival Alina, Brolite agreed to accompany the human as his bodyguard for a while. When it was time to sleep, Brolite and Bee joined forces in snoring loud enough to form a death choir, caught in the middle of this friendly fire. Poor Takaru knew perfectly well he wouldn't get a wink of sleep. And sure enough, when morning came and the journey continued, the poor guy's eyes were sunk deep with exhaustion. At least there was some consolation. They soon arrived at the bridge leading to the land of the dwarves where the mine containing the ore he needed was located. Takaru remarked that Mount Ryuhai looked a lot like Mount Hataka, but Brolite had no idea what he meant. Finally, the two reached the urban area, and before anything else, the human wanted a proper meal before continuing the journey. At a restaurant, the group was served the house specialty jupe meat rolls. Brolite commented that it was just as delicious as her lizard friend had said it would be. Curious, since he also had a friend of that same race, Takaru asked who this person was. She explained that the lizard had earned the title of Holy Dragon Knight of the Storfa's Empire and was now known as the Dragon King of Honor. Coincidentally, that friend was heading to Belkame, so there was a good chance they might run into him at some point. As it turned out, not even a minute passed before Clayston appeared at their table. According to him, this world really was a small place. Changing the subject, he scolded Takaru for leaving Belkame without saying a word to him. Takaru defended himself, saying he had informed the guild, and that he was only taking a short trip to collect Ildra ore from the Ryuhai mine. The lizard argued that someone of Takaru's rank wasn't supposed to accept ore collecting missions, especially not from a place crawling with danger. Speaking of which, he hoped the kid was being paid handsomely for it. Takaru assured him it was a great deal, since he'd be getting a fine pair of scissors in exchange for the ores. In fact, if things went well, he might even get a bonus a pot, or maybe a frying pan for rolled eggs. Hearing that, Clay couldn't tell if the boy was a complete weirdo or just a really chill guy. But Takaru explained that, for a collector, a good pair of scissors was far more important than any sword. Speaking of swords, since Clay needed to repair his spear in Vosrau, he decided to join his partner on the journey. Overhearing the conversation, Brolite excitedly suggested that the two of them could be the collector's bodyguards. And so, said and done, they both vowed to protect the young human from the dangers of the world. An old lizard and an elf with the mind of a child, thought Takaru. What could possibly go wrong? After leaving the restaurant, the group waited in a huge line to enter the dwarven country. But Clayston pulled a few strings and got them through ahead of everyone else, or, in plain words, they cut the line, because the Dragon King of Honor had clout. Once the guards let them in, they explained that the fortress of Vosrau had once been just a simple post office built inside the hole left by mining operations, facing the dwarven capital. Takaru was stunned by the complexity of the structure, the lighting, the ventilation, and the sheer scale of that underground city. The guard informed them that the king wished to see Clayston, which clearly didn't please the lizard. Takaru asked if he was friends with the most important person in the kingdom, and Clay admitted, unfortunately, yes. The guard didn't understand why he sounded so sad about it, considering this lizard was none other than the hero who had saved their country from Zengam, the Thunder Roar King. Clay corrected him, saying the story wasn't quite like that. Back then, the dwarves were skilled at crafting weapons, but not so much at using them. Because of that, they were forced to pay a heavy tribute to a ruthless demon. But one day, that demon laid eyes on Clayston, who was just passing through, and immediately fled to the skies, never to return. Because of that, says the guard, they built a statue in honor of the Dragon King of Honor. Truth be told, that statue doesn't look anything like the lizard. But even so, he doesn't like at all seeing his name written on that piece of junk. Be that as it may, the group continues on their way until they find the king of the dwarves in his throne room. First of all, as if he were arguing with his younger brother, Clay asks why the hell they made that weird statue of him in the square. Takaru politely introduces himself to King Zoroastrian, but the dwarf hates that kind of formality and tells the boy to say right away what he came for. Thus, the human delivers a letter from Grotha's Pendras, the famous blacksmith known to the king, asking for permission for the human collector to explore the Ruhai mine. The king asks if the boy is aware that, after an earthquake that happened months ago, the mine became home to demons, and is surprised when Takaru confirms without hesitation. Clayston informs that he will act as the human's bodyguard on this expedition alongside Valverita Brolite, who also has full capacity to deal with challenges worthy of that mine. According to the Lizardman, given that, the king orders the group to discover the truth behind the appearance of the demons in the Ruhai mine, and Takaru already realizes he won't be leaving that place anytime soon. Even so, he agrees to set out on this extra mission. King Zoroastrian sends a trusted dwarf to guide the group, a local guild receptionist named Zanbo. When he opens the door with the mine's key, darkness takes over the visitor's eyes. So Takaru uses his illumination skill to brighten the path. In addition, the collector manages to use a technique that allows the team members to see the mine's map when they use their search skills. Looking around, Takaru notices that the ores at the entrance are still quite weak, so he suggests they go straight to the deeper areas. However, before that, they need to deal with giant spiders emerging from the shadows. Clay kills the first one with his spear, and Takaru casts his paralysis skill on the second, allowing Brolite to finish it off easily. Following the path, Takaru notices that the magical element is thick in that place. He senses Ildra in a certain cave wall, so he creates his own method to excavate, raising a magic shield to protect the surroundings and throwing fireballs responsible for causing the explosion. Thus, as if by magic, the boy manages to expose several veins of Ildrite. According to the guide, he asks if it wasn't supposed to be Ildra, and the dwarf explains that this is much better than Ildra. Analyzing the material, Takaru agrees. After all, this material contains a magical element. However, not everything goes well on this expedition, since B warns the human about the arrival of some threat. Frightened, Zanbo is sure they are demons, so Takaru asks to handle this enemy alone after all. They are the natural prey of him and B. That said, from the shadows appears not a demon, but a giant crab that makes the duo's mouths water. Because of that, Takaru and B start celebrating, leaving the group members quite confused. On the other hand, the monster wasn't in a sporting mood that day and decided to attack the two with its shell, forcing them to dodge at the last moment. Clay and Brolite warn that is a Trango crab, and a rank creature that requires good teamwork to be defeated. However, seeing this enemy only as the perfect dish for lunch, Takaru asks his comrades to stay back and activates a bunch of buffs on his body to attack the monster with B alone. The baby dragon starts the counterattack with a roar that destabilizes the crab, while the human hits the creature's head with his staff, but the shell was so tough it barely caused any damage. Seeing that the boy was having trouble avoiding the enemy's blows, B freezes one of the giant animal's legs, and Takaru uses his scan ability to identify the target's weak points. After discovering what they were, he throws ice spears and freezes the entire creature. With that, Brolite and Zambo approach the frozen corpse as if they were admiring a work of art. However, Clay is not happy at all with the two pranksters who decided to fight alone, so much that he decides to question why they did that. Afraid of the sinister aura the Lizardman was giving off, Takaru explains that if they used weapons all covered in mud and blood, that could ruin the edible parts. Besides, he and B are used to fighting this type of monster. Still, Clay reminds him that he came to this dungeon as the human's bodyguard, and no matter how extraordinary his magic is, he must remain calm in moments like that, trust his allies, and fight as a team. According to the lizard, he and Brolite would never ignore Takaru's wishes, so it would be good if he showed more trust in them. The boy and his pet lower their heads, feeling the weight of the scolding. However, Clayston himself pats both of them on the head to make it clear that everything's fine, then calls the kids to collect the monster's parts. Hours of expedition later, the group had already explored practically the entire place and gathered a huge amount of ore, but Takaru kept receiving strong readings from the bottom of the cave, meaning there was a good chance they would find even more valuable resources. Unable to believe what he had seen so far, Zambo points out that this boy defeated the demon of the labyrinth and found this rich mineral deposit in the land of the dwarves, and that makes the man so emotional that he bursts into tears, thinking about the earthquakes, the distortions all over the land, and the monsters awakened by accumulated magicula. Takaru imagines that purifying Voldius's magicula may have had a much greater impact than he thought, and maybe that's what the dragon meant with that phrase, a single drop that can change the world. Takaru had always done things his own way, but maybe he really is changing this world little by little, with or without intention, and if that's the case, he hopes it's a positive change for everyone he met along the way. After returning to King Zoroastrian, Takeru announces that he explored the mine and eliminated the biggest threat. The king asks his envoy if that's true, and Zambo confirms that he saw everything with his own eyes. In fact, to tell the truth, he didn't even blink because it was so incredible. Now, since words alone aren't enough, the dwarf asks the human to present to the ruler the body of the demon that tormented Ryuhai Mine. So Takeru throws the frozen corpse of the creature on the floor. As the walls trembled with the weight of that giant, the king broke into a cold sweat and remarked on that terrible presence before him. Anyway, the corpse is evidence that Kamishio Takeru accomplished an amazing feat and, because of that, deserves a reward just as valuable. In this case, Takeru asks to keep the demon as his reward, a request Zoroastrian can't understand. After getting what he wanted, the boy, alongside B, could only think about the sashimi he would make with that alien crab meat, and also that the material of the creature's shell might be useful to make shears for collecting. The next day, Brolite is amazed to find a legendary Pegasus. The guard explains that a messenger from the king came, and they received orders to prepare the elf's reward immediately. Besides that, they repaired Clayton's spear perfectly. Mounting the animal, Brolite says she must go home and deliver the Pegasus to her sister. But before leaving, she emphasizes that she owes Takeru such a great debt that she could spend her whole life without ever being able to repay it. For his part, the boy doesn't care about any debt, since he now has a crab the size of a house. When Clay announces that the carriage is arriving, the boy says goodbye to his companion, who believes they'll meet again soon. That said, the elf takes off with the Pegasus and promises she'll go after her comrades one day, then flies away with an evil laugh. Takeru is sure that's the kind of thing you say to an enemy, but since the woman's far away, he just lets it go. After that, the young man returns to the guild and is kindly greeted by Ariana, who's curious about the fact that the human is accompanied by Clayston. Takeru was about to say that the partner came along without being asked, but the lizard steps in to clarify that they formed a temporary group for an indefinite period. The receptionist becomes overjoyed and runs to tell the news to Wade. Takeru glares at his companion, and the lizard replies that he's a wanderer with no destination. Besides, he could see that Takeru is far from being an ordinary human, and having someone to keep an eye on his crazy ideas isn't such a bad idea. About that, Takeru reflects that Clay is a bit moralistic sometimes, but that traveling with him might actually be interesting. Soon after, the two sit at a table in the guild, and after some time talking, they decide to name the group with Clayston's suggestion, the Blue and Black Brigade. Leaving the guild, Takeru delivers the Ildrita ore to the master blacksmith, Grauthus Pendras. At first, judging by the strange reaction of the man and his assistant, the human feared he might have handed them the wrong thing. But the truth was, the two blacksmiths were losing their minds from sheer excitement. As if that wasn't enough, the two grown men suddenly burst into tears of joy. Ribble expressed how happy he was for having asked the boy to take on this job because the shine and density of those ores were simply perfect. Grauthus, even while crying himself, told the girl not to cry, and the two ended up hugging each other, sobbing, feeling awkward. Takeru thanked them for their trust, and the dwarf revealed he had never seen so much Ildrita gathered in one place in all his 120 years of life. Thinking it over, Takeru knew the material was high quality, but he hadn't imagined these people would be this moved. Even if his scan skill said it was perfect, a collector could never be sure it was exactly to the client's taste. Still, one thing was certain: he had made them genuinely happy, and for the first time, Takeru felt proud of being a collector. That's when Ribble admitted they wouldn't be able to pay for all those stones, since there were far more than expected. But Takeru insisted that all he'd asked for was a custom-made pair of scissors. As for the ores, he wanted the blacksmiths to use every single piece and forge a sword so incredible it could win first prize at the exhibition. Half a month later, alongside the Dragon King of Honor and his inseparable friend B, the humble Kamishiro Takeru was downing a few mugs of some random drink at the tavern until Wade showed up, looking for the young human. Apparently, someone important had summoned him. When Takeru looked at the letter Wade handed him, Clayston noticed the seal. It was the crest of House Lusalavach. Takeru asked if that meant the Lord of Belcame, and Wade explained it was almost that. Since Lusalavach was a territory within the same city, the boy could already smell trouble. Letters from landowners rarely meant anything good, but Wade assured him that Lord Belmanent might be a noble, yet he wasn't the unpleasant type. With that, Kamishiro opened the letter and read, "To the gentleman Gildius Clayston and Takeru of the Blue and Black Brigade. I wish to grant honors for your achievements on the plains of Stavro. Please visit my mansion on the date indicated on the following page." Both members of the brigade suspected it might just be an excuse for that noble to try and take B away from Takeru, since the dragon species was so rare and valuable, but Wade insisted that Belmanent wasn't that kind of person, and besides, he didn't even have the authority to do that. Not in the mood for more talk, Takeru invited his dragon friend to head to the coast and eat some fresh sashimi instead. In the next scene, the Blue and Black Brigade were riding in a carriage so fancy that every villager they passed stopped to stare in awe. Takeru wasn't thrilled with all the attention, though Clayston commented that being summoned to a lord's mansion was every adventurer's dream since life could change completely if a noble chose to support you. Even a rough-around-the-edges adventurer could gain credibility with a noble's endorsement. Speaking of nobility, Takeru's jaw dropped when they arrived at Belkame's noble district, home of House Lucilavach, the residence of the famed Belmonent. The man's house was practically a castle, complete with a butler named Raymond, whose sole job was to receive guests and guide them through. At the entrance, 2 lines of maids stood perfectly aligned on either side, greeting the adventurers in flawless synchronization with their skirts, a sight that left Takeru genuinely impressed. But then, a spoiled-looking girl descended the stairs, instantly killing Takeru's mood. She stared straight at B and asked if that was the baby dragon everyone had been talking about. Getting no response, she muttered that she thought the creature would be smarter, but whatever. She demanded to have it anyway and ordered Takeru to hand it over. Naturally, he refused. The girl looked baffled. After all, dragons were noble beings, meaning only someone as noble as herself was worthy of owning one. Takeru used scan on her and learned she was Tiras March Lucilavach, the only daughter of Count Belmonent. Thinking about how to handle the situation, the boy knelt down and asked why she believed she had the right to possess this dragon. Tiras answered simply that Bernard had told her about an adventurer who owned a dragon, and she told him she wanted it. Bernard also said that when dealing with rude adventurers, she had to act firm so they would obey, fighting the urge to punch this Bernard guy. Takeru calmly explained that B was part of his family and could never be given to anyone. Finally realizing how annoying she'd been, the little noble apologized for her behavior. As kind as ever, B forgave her right away, earning a not-so-gentle hug from the girl. Takeru then asked why she wanted a dragon so badly, and Tiras started to explain it was for her mother. But before she could finish, her father appeared and cut in. Takeru looked at the man, unable to believe someone so young and handsome was actually the lord of these lands. The Count introduced himself as Belmonent, Lord of Belkame. Belmonent gathered the 2 guests for tea and apologized for his daughter's behavior. Clayston got straight to the point, asking what the Count wanted from them. The Lord explained that his wife, Muleteria, had been bedridden for 6 months, and during that time, he'd heard rumors about Takeru. Word was that a sick resident from the Bospo district had miraculously recovered one day, thanks to Takeru's help. Because of that, Belmonent wanted to save his wife with the boy's extraordinary power. Hearing that, Takeru reflected, his magic was strong enough to evolve clay. Sure, but he was still afraid of what might happen if he misjudged the dose. Belmonent says that his daughter wanted a dragon because of her mother. In a few days, Tiras will have to return to the royal capital to resume her classes, and she thought that, by having an adorable creature, she could cheer her mother up in her bed, even if just a little. As much as it sounds like a silly idea, the man believes the girl has a kind heart. Clay and B can't hold it and start crying in front of everyone, while Takeru, on the other hand, knows that this guy is a count and that he can't make a wrong move with people like that, unless he wants to get in trouble. Thinking about what to do, the young collector agrees to see the Lord's wife, so Belmonent takes the members of the Blue and Black Brigade to Muleteria's room, where the poor woman is lying down. As he enters, the first thing Takeru notices is that it's been a while since this room was aired out so much that B lets out a sneeze. Belmonent tells his wife that he brought the man with mysterious powers to heal her, then invites Takeru to come closer. Before anything, the boy asks to brighten the room a bit, but the Count explains that his wife is sensitive to sunlight. Therefore, the collector gets closer, scans the woman, and discovers that she has cataract, gait disorder, anemia, kidney disease, iver poisoning, among other things. Faced with that, he believes he can treat her light sensitivity and joint pain, and although the boy has never heard of this iver poisoning, he feels that treating the rest might help. Now, before anything else, Takeru needs to know if the Lord really trusts him after all. He's just a collector, exhausted from so many illnesses. Muleteria expresses her wish to take the risk, since all she wants is to be able to hug her daughter again. Faced with that, Belmonent asks Takeru to save his wife. Without hesitation, the young collector accepts the challenge. Clayston asks if the boy will use the same technique he used to heal his wounds, but the human explains that that spell burns an enormous amount of internal mana, and the patient probably wouldn't withstand the consequences of it in her current condition. Before anything else, Takeru needs to deal with that dark room. But since Muleteria's sight is quite weak and can't stand strong light, he focuses on this problem first. When he asks her to close her eyes, he casts a healing spell at a much weaker level than usual, because if he increased the intensity, it might cause her pain. After performing the procedure, he asks the woman to open her eyes, and the first thing she notices is that her vision has become stronger. Confident that he did the right thing, Takeru casts his cleaning magic to tidy up the whole room, also opening the windows and curtains so the air could circulate and the light could come in. The woman's feeling upon realizing that her eyes could now bear the light was as if she were witnessing a miracle, and her husband showed the same emotion while staying by her side the whole time. Clayston praises his teammate's brilliant act, but sensing that something is wrong with the mansion's servants who are present, Takaru decides not to speak about the situation in front of them. Without delay, in a more distant place, the collector says that Muleteria is being poisoned by a toxin called Ivor. It's very likely that she's being poisoned by someone who has daily access to her, so it makes sense to think that the servants might have some involvement. To make things worse, Takaru doesn't know the biological mechanism behind Ivor, so it's impossible to create an antidote. As if that weren't enough, the Ivor toxin is a forbidden poison lost in time, so practically no one should know a way to reverse this poisoning. Taking into account that the toxin comes from an ancient era, the Lord could use the books that have belonged to his family for generations to find some answer about this, even though it's an enormous challenge. Said and done, the Lord of those lands gathers as many books, documents, and records as he can to research any clue leading toward the unknown Ivor. The great majority are written in an ancient script and would be difficult to translate. However, Takaru was not only able to understand that script through his abilities. Besides that, since there were many documents, he could focus a spell that would filter his search among the papers through a keyword, just like he used to do on the computer back in his previous times on planet Earth. By doing so, a specific book stands out and advances the search quite a bit, for it contained a section about the Ivor flower, although it was a somewhat ridiculous tale that wouldn't necessarily correspond to reality. In any case, focused on discovering clues, Takaru commits himself to interpret the child who wrote that section, even imitating her voice for some reason, leaving the people beside him completely confused. According to the book, the story was about Pola Pola, the cutest adventurer of all time, who wrote this diary about her incredible journeys. In one of them, Pola Pola found a beautiful lake that had around it an impressive statue of a winged horse. And that's where she found the most golden and shining flowers of all time, super rare flowers known as Ivor. Tired of the annoying voice Takaru was imitating, Clayston covers his mouth and says he knows of a lake where there is a statue with a horse, and he points on the map to a location near a small village called Asteth. However, since it's in the Vanon region, outside the territory of Lusalavach, it would take about 5 days by carriage just to get there. Either way, Takaru thinks they should leave as soon as possible. In the next scene, one of the mansion's servants watches the group of adventurers leaving. However, before leaving, Takaru spreads a few magic crystals around the house as a safety measure, since while they are away, someone with bad intentions might try to harm Miss Muleteria. At that moment, Tiris comes running to apologize to the boy before he departs. She admits that she behaved rudely toward the person who helped her mother so much and will still help even more. Hearing that, Takaru admits he didn't like the way he was treated. However, he points out that the very fact that the girl realized on her own the mistake she made and came to apologize already shows that she truly regretted it, and that she should be proud, because when we notice that we are wrong, it means we are paying more attention to other people's feelings, which makes us more empathetic, respectful, and fair. Because of that, the collector asks the girl to keep paying attention to those details in the future, especially now that they are going away. Because while they are gone, someone might come whispering in her ear that Takaru and his friends are villains, and that they are against the Lusalevach family. If that happens, Takaru wants Tiris not to say anything rash, just go talk to her father first. He calls this procedure report, contact, consult, or reconcom, and he wants the little girl to do the same. Happy with the man's kind words, the girl promises to do her best and memorizes the sequence of words from the procedure. Thus, the Blue Brigade sets out on their journey, but before they properly hit the road, the collector boosts the group's horses by casting haste and reduction on their limbs, making their bodies lighter and faster, greatly reducing the time they would take to reach the village near the lake. A few days pass, and although the journey had been tiring, the increased speed was a very welcome blessing, especially when they arrive on the outskirts of Asteth and are met with a terrible drought that has harmed the entire territory. Clayston laments, after all, the last time he passed by. There was a lush agricultural region there, and now it had become practically a dead desert. Even so, the lizardman believes that a lake as large as that one still wouldn't have dried up. So they continue their march until they find their destination. After a few minutes of horseback riding, they really found the lake. But like the rest of that land, it was horribly affected by the drought. Takaru analyzes the lake and discovers that its name is Gallius. Lake Gallius is the only source of water in Vanon and, known for being a sacred area, it had never dried up. However, it was poisoned by someone. Suddenly, 3 residents from the nearby village approach to find out who the invaders of their land are. The 3 were in rags, dirty, and hungry. Takaru introduces his group as adventurers sent from Belkane to gather rare materials, and the villagers doubt that they are adventurers. So Clay shows his guild bracelet that proves he is rank A, which convinces the men and makes them lower their guard. Takaru approaches to ask some questions, but a boy named Gonza ends up falling to the ground from hunger and thirst, which interrupts the conversation and shifts the focus to the most urgent and serious matter of that region: the terrible drought that has been destroying the whole community. The young collector shows interest in knowing what is really going on, so the farmers lead the Blue Brigade to Asteth. where, according to the villagers' leader, the lake began to have that cursed color about 10 months ago. Then the fish started dying and the well water began to spoil, which dragged the village into a deeper and deeper, irreversible pit. It was then that, at the peak of the crisis, a merchant named Ingash appeared, who saved the people of Astith with a proposal in which he offered water in exchange for a shining golden flower that grows on the edge of the lake. A plant that looked exactly like the divine flower told in local legends. As they grew in a secret place, the people of Astith agreed to deliver one per month in exchange for 60 barrels of water. But this water was never enough for the crops, that is. The plantations kept drying and the food dying. After hearing the whole story, even though the people of that place saw the merchant as someone valuable and willing to help the village, Takaru states without hesitation that this man is deceiving everyone by showing up with this irresistible offer right after their lake became unusable, mainly because the lake was poisoned by someone, which only increases the suspicion. And on top of that, the divine flower, known as Ivor, is a poisonous plant. Extremely irritated that this merchant harmed the village to the point of leaving people starving, and still used Ivor to poison others, the collector decides to go after the truth and punish this so-called Ingash. Thus, starting the work, he asks B to cast a spiritual spell. Then the dragon rises to the skies and lets out a roar that darkens the clouds to the point of making them pour down a great rain, a rain that brings joy to the faces and hearts of the people who lived there, as they hadn't seen rain in months. Next, Takaru uses his cleansing magic to wash away the dirt from the people who had been so mistreated. After that, he casts the repair technique to rebuild the houses and facilities that had been damaged, giving new life to that village. Finally, he even uses his own resources to prepare a real feast for the people of Astith, who couldn't believe in the kindness of that man. Without wasting time, the entire population helps themselves to eat as much as they can. After all, the intense hunger has been one of the village's curses. With all that help provided by the young adventurer, the leader of the community has no idea how he could repay such a grand gesture. So Takaru asks him to look for and gather the Ivor flower, since someone he knows needs the antidote made from this substance. The villager offers to take the adventurers there, but still believes it's too little to pay for what Takaru has done. In the middle of that, 3 village children appear to thank the tall young man for everything he did for everyone, and also volunteer to take him to their secret base. Said and done, accompanied by his friends, Gonza leads Takaru to a warehouse far from the village, where they store the Lindes fruit from last autumn. Unfortunately, it can't be eaten because it's too salty and ends up being thrown away, but the nectar it produces is very sweet and tasty. That said, the visitor tastes the fruit's nectar and feels the exact same flavor as soy sauce, which is very typical in Japan, where he came from, a kind of seasoning everyone there knows and uses. Meanwhile, at the Lucilovach house, Tiris runs to her mother's bedroom door after hearing a beeping signal. Takaru had placed a barrier around the room using a magic device, and that barrier would trigger an alarm if anyone with bad intentions approached Militaria, which is exactly what's happening now. Upon reaching the door, Tiris sees one of the household servants entering, then asks if it was him who tried to kill her mother, because Sir Takaru said that any bad person who tried to enter her mother's room would be reported by the alarm. Obviously, the man denies the accusation and tries to make the girl believe that the adventurer is just a greedy one like all the others, an unknown man who doesn't deserve any trust, while he himself has worked at the Lucilevach house for years with complete loyalty. At that moment, the girl's father appears, so Tiris announces that she wants to use the Reconcom. Therefore, Count Belmonent takes both the girl and the servant to an office, where, after some time analyzing the case, he admits that Takaru might be trying to deceive the family, but it's also true that he improved his wife's condition, and the magic device he installed indicates that the servant is dangerous. To be sure of who is telling the truth, the Lord gives the servant a glass of the special water he bought for his wife's treatment. All the time, the man shows visible nervousness, which was already suspicious enough. But everything became clear when Belmonent threw the water in the man's face, and he began to scream in despair, afraid of the poison. Faced with this, the Count drinks the liquid and explains that it is only water, while the false medicine that the servant had bought was sealed so that no one else would be poisoned. Finally, since the servant's reaction was more than enough, the master called the guards to take him away. Raymond, the butler, found among Bernard's belongings a letter that made the Count's eyes nearly jump out, for the message was written in complex codes and an ancient language, suggesting that a larger organization was involved in the case. Back in Astith village, a man knocked hard on the community leader's door, irritated for not being answered. A guard approached the man to see what was going on and discovered it was none other than Ingash, the merchant who had established the trade agreement with the village. He had come earlier this month to get his Ivor flower, But upon learning that the village chief had left to guide adventurers, and that Astith would probably no longer provide the Ivor flower after discovering it was poisonous, the merchant decided to summon his henchmen to solve the situation in a less peaceful way. Amid all that, Bernard smiled while being taken away by the guards in a carriage. In the outskirts of Astith, inside a cave, the village chief noticed they were getting close as they reached the sandy part of the terrain. A bit ahead, Takaru, B, and Clay were left open-mouthed by the beauty their eyes were witnessing a secret place by Lake Gallius, where there truly was a statue of a winged horse, and in front of it, several divine flowers shone in all their brightness and splendor. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.